nesting and healing, and also I don't even know I had the bandwidth at that time to think about what the big picture dream was. There was no plan. It was just, let's get through these next couple years, create community.
Meghan Markle didn't receive a rejection letter. She received something colder. British Vogue released its 2025 rankings, quietly crowning Princess Catherine as a global style icon, while saying nothing at all about Meghan. No critique, no explanation, just absence. In fashion's most elite circles, silence is never accidental. It signals trust, access, and who no longer fits in the room. As Catherine was elevated with calm authority, Meghan's omission spoke louder than any headline. What does it mean when influence still trends, but institutional favor disappears? Stay with us, because this decision reveals far more than fashion. The list that changed the room. The moment the list went live, the reaction wasn't loud, but it was instant. Editors paused. Stylists reread the names. Industry insiders understood that something had shifted even before social media caught up. British Vogue hadn't teased the release or framed it as a spectacle. It simply published its inaugural best-dressed list and let the implications travel on their own. That restraint was the tell. When Vogue moves quietly, it's because the message is meant for people who already know how to listen. On the surface, the list looked familiar. Elegance, taste, influence. But this wasn't a roundup of outfits or a seasonal mood board. Vogue made it clear, this wasn't about trends. It was about presence, about the people whose style carries weight before a word is spoken. In that sense, the list functioned less like praise and more like placement. A map of who matters right now and why. That's why lists like this operate as gatekeeping tools. They don't celebrate effort, they codify authority. Inclusion signals trust. Exclusion signals something more complicated. Vogue doesn't explain its choices because it doesn't have to. In elite media, explanation weakens power. The list exists to define the room, not to justify it. And the room was defined sharply. Names appeared with intention, each one reinforcing a particular lane: legacy, restraint, cultural reach. The sequencing mattered, the framing mattered, even the language mattered. Vogue wasn't inviting debate, it was setting terms. This is who shapes culture without chasing it. This is who can be relied upon to endure, which is why the absences landed harder than the inclusions. In a list designed to account for influence across fashion, film, music, and global culture, missing names weren't accidental. Vogue doesn't forget people with visibility. It filters them. The omission wasn't a snub, it was a decision. And decisions in institutions like Vogue are rarely emotional. They're strategic. That's the moment the announcement turned into interpretation, because once readers moved past the headlines, the real question emerged. What does this list say about access, about who still belongs inside the inner circle, and who no longer defines it? Vogue didn't criticize, it didn't clarify, it simply published and stepped back. And in doing so, it reminded everyone watching that power in fashion doesn't announce itself. It arranges the room, closes the door softly, and lets silence do the rest. So if silence was the message, who exactly was Vogue speaking to? And why now? Don't blink, because what comes next will shock you. Crowned without campaign. Catherine didn't arrive on the list the way others did. She wasn't blended in, ranked among peers, or framed as part of a rotating moment. She was positioned. At first glance, it was clear that Catherine, Princess of Wales, wasn't being compared. She was being set apart. At the very top, Vogue didn't treat her as a participant in fashion culture. It treated her as a fixture within it. That distinction matters. Most figures on lists like these are rewarded for momentum, a strong year, a viral look, a fresh angle. Catherine's placement worked differently. There was no sense of competition, no suggestion that she had outperformed others in the usual way. Instead, her position communicated inevitability. She wasn't crowned because she campaigned, evolved, or demanded space. She was crowned because she had already become structural. The language Vogue used reinforced that message. Calling her a global, or eternal influencer, wasn't about reach or relevance in the modern sense. Those words signal durability, permanence. They suggest influence that doesn't spike or fade, but accumulates quietly over time. Vogue wasn't praising a season of good choices, it was acknowledging a long-term alignment with institutions that value continuity over noise. That's why Catherine wasn't framed alongside trendsetters or digital disruptors. Vogue didn't compare her to figures whose power depends on visibility or reinvention. Instead, it placed her conceptually alongside legacy names. Women whose influence outlived cycles, headlines, and backlash. Figures who didn't need to announce authority because the system already recognized it. In that company, Catherine wasn't the newest addition. She was the natural successor. Her style history explains why. Vogue highlighted not experimentation, but consistency, loyalty to British designers, a measured relationship with vintage fashion, an instinct for timing rather than attention. Catherine doesn't overwhelm brands. She elevates them with restraint. A single appearance can shift a label's trajectory, not through spectacle, but through trust. Designers don't brace for controversy when she wears their work. They anticipate stability. And stability is the currency Vogue values most when it thinks long-term. Especially now. Fashion, like media, is volatile. Trends burn out fast. Influence fractures easily. Against that backdrop, Catherine represents something rare. A figure whose presence calms markets instead of rattling them. Vogue understands this dynamic intimately. Its role isn't just to reflect culture, but to protect it from excess. The article even pointed forward, not just back. Vogue noted that Catherine's influence is expected to grow, particularly as her formal role within the monarchy expands. That projection is crucial. It shows that Vogue isn't reacting to who she is now, but investing in who she is becoming. Few figures are afforded that confidence. This is where recognition turns into institutional trust. Vogue didn't just acknowledge Catherine's impact, it aligned itself with her future authority. That alignment isn't sentimental, it's strategic. It signals that Catherine's power doesn't rely on constant validation. It's embedded within systems that move slowly, deliberately, and decisively. By the time readers absorbed that framing, the message was unmistakable. Catherine didn't win the moment. She transcended it. And in doing so, she revealed how Vogue measures real influence, not by who speaks the loudest, but by who the institution is willing to stand behind when the noise fades. But if influence is about legacy, not volume, who actually controls fashion's future? Keep watching to find out. The economics of the Kate effect. Fashion didn't react when Catherine moved. It recalibrated. Retailers watched inventory. Designers tracked traffic. Analysts noted the timing. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, appears publicly, the impact isn't emotional or speculative. It's measurable. Sales spike. Waiting lists form. Smaller brands experience overnight visibility that would normally take years to build. This isn't admiration. It's market behavior. And markets don't respond to symbolism unless there's substance behind it. The so-called Kate effect operates like an economic lever. A single outfit can push a label from niche recognition into mainstream demand. Production schedules shift. Export interest increases. Digital searches surge in patterns that can be directly traced to one appearance. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't hype. It's consistency meeting credibility. The key difference is reliability. Catherine doesn't generate unpredictable bursts of attention. She generates confidence. Brands don't worry about backlash or volatility. They anticipate steady return. That distinction is exactly how Vogue evaluates influence. Not through applause, but through systems. Vogue doesn't ask who is most talked about this week. It asks whose presence creates downstream effects on designers, retailers, cultural institutions, and long-term partnerships. Influence in this context isn't volume, it's leverage, and leverage only works when it can be trusted to repeat without collapse. This is where restraint becomes valuable. Catherine doesn't appear everywhere. She doesn't dilute her presence across endless platforms or partnerships. Each appearance remains rare enough to matter, controlled enough to reassure. Vogue understands scarcity economics. Visibility without limits cheapens impact. Restraint preserves it. That's why Catherine's influence compounds rather than spikes. She doesn't need to remind the public she exists. The system does it for her. From a financial perspective, this makes her unusually attractive to institutions, Vogue included. Magazines like Vogue don't just document fashion, they safeguard its hierarchy. They know which figures stabilize the ecosystem and which ones disrupt it unpredictably. Stability doesn't mean boring, it means dependable. In uncertain cultural climates, dependable figures become anchors. Catherine functions as one. What's critical here is that this economic influence operates without negotiation. Catherine doesn't announce collaborations or demand outcomes. She doesn't frame appearances as strategy. The market reacts independently. That autonomy is what makes the effect credible. When influence requires explanation, it weakens. When it operates quietly, it strengthens. This is why Vogue's decision wasn't sentimental. It was analytical. Vogue didn't elevate Catherine because she's admired. It elevated her because she reduces risk. In fashion, that's priceless. Brands don't just want attention, they want assurance that attention won't turn volatile. Catherine offers that assurance by doing less, not more. And this is where money connects to editorial logic. Vogue's lists aren't popularity contests. They're forecasts. They reflect who Vogue believes will continue to move systems years from now, not who is peaking today. Catherine's economic footprint signals durability. Her influence isn't tied to controversy cycles or constant reinvention. It's built into institutions that reward patience. By recognizing that, Vogue wasn't simply documenting the Kate effect, it was aligning itself with it. Because when an institution chooses stability over spectacle, it's making a long-term bet. And in Vogue's calculus, Catherine remains one of the safest, strongest investments in modern cultural influence. But when the list expanded and the spotlight widened, why was Meghan Markle suddenly missing? And what did that omission really signal? Stay with us. 55 names and one silence. When the second list dropped, there was no room left for doubt. This wasn't a tight, exclusive ranking where a missing name could be brushed off as an editorial choice or a lack of space. This was a wide net. 55 names, actors, designers, musicians, cultural power players. British Vogue made sure no lane was left out. And that's exactly why the silence hit so hard. The list read like a roll call of modern influence. Amal Clooney is praised for her commitment to a singular, recognizable look. Musicians are credited for shaping not just sound, but also visual culture. Actors celebrated for confidence, eccentricity, and risk. Even men were given clear space, each framed with intention. Everyone had a role. Everyone had a reason for being there. Every name came with context. And Meghan Markle still wasn't on it. At that point, it stopped being about fashion curiosity and became something else entirely. This wasn't Vogue overlooking her. Vogue doesn't overlook figures of her profile. This was Vogue deciding she no longer fit the definition the list was built around. In elite media, that distinction matters. Being forgotten is rare. Being filtered out is deliberate. Lists like this don't measure popularity. They measure clarity. Who are you right now? What do you represent? What lane do you occupy without explanation? Every name on that list answered those questions cleanly. That's why they were there. Meghan's absence suggested something Vogue didn't spell out, but didn't need to. Whatever she represents at this stage, the magazine didn't see it as cultural authority. And Vogue never explained the omission. That wasn't hesitation, it was confidence. Institutions like Vogue don't issue footnotes for decisions they've already settled internally. Silence is how they communicate finality without inviting negotiation. A statement would have softened the blow. Silence sharpened it. Inside fashion and media circles, the message landed immediately. Inclusion on lists like this isn't just symbolic. It affects invitations, collaborations, and access. It shapes who gets trusted with long-term partnerships and who is seen as unpredictable. Vogue's quiet choice signaled that uncertainty had entered the equation. What made the omission louder was how comprehensive the list was. This wasn't about personal taste or editorial bias. Vogue accounted for almost every corner of modern culture, which meant the absence wasn't accidental. It was definitional. Meghan wasn't left out because she lacked visibility. She was left out because Vogue couldn't or wouldn't define her influence in a way that fit the room. And once that happens, consequences follow quietly. Not overnight, not publicly, but steadily. Other gatekeepers notice. Editors take cues. Invitations slow. Support becomes conditional. In industries built on alignment, uncertainty is costly. The list didn't attack. It didn't criticize. It didn't even acknowledge the gap. Vogue simply moved forward as if the room were complete. And that's what made the silence so heavy. Because in worlds governed by access, being ignored isn't neutral. It's a signal that something has shifted and that the door didn't slam. It just stopped opening. So, when influence no longer opens doors, did Meghan Markle try to force them instead? Keep watching to find out. When control becomes the problem, things didn't fall apart because of silence. They shifted the moment Meghan Markle tried to re-enter the room on her own terms. According to multiple industry accounts, she didn't wait for British Vogue to come knocking. She reached out. But what followed wasn't a standard editorial conversation. It was a list of conditions. Sources say the request wasn't subtle. A full feature, prominent placement, approval of images, approval of quotes, approval of the final narrative, not collaboration, control. In practical terms, it meant Vogue would provide the platform, while Meghan would decide the story. And that's where the door quietly stopped opening. Vogue works with powerful women every year. Heads of state, cultural icons, industry giants. None of them dictates editorial authority. That authority is the magazine's currency. Once it's surrendered, Vogue stops being Vogue. It becomes a billboard. And insiders are clear, Vogue doesn't operate that way, especially not when a public figure's image has become polarizing. This wasn't about ambition. Ambition is expected. What raised eyebrows was entitlement. The sense that access was assumed, not earned. That the magazine's role would be to execute, not interpret. In elite fashion media, that tone matters more than the ask itself. Because power in these spaces is quiet, and it's shared only with those who understand the balance. There was no dramatic fallout. No leaked emails. No public rejection. Vogue declined politely, firmly. And then it moved on. In this world, that kind of response speaks volumes. A loud no creates a storyline. A quiet one closes the file. And the consequences didn't stop there. Once Vogue steps back, others take note. Editors talk, stylists notice, invitations slow. Not because of punishment, but because confidence has been shaken. Institutions don't like uncertainty. And when a figure insists on controlling every frame, every word, every outcome, it signals risk. There was a time when Meghan's presence felt intriguing, new, unpredictable. Fashion thrives on that kind of mystery, but mystery depends on distance. Over time, the messaging became familiar, carefully managed, repeated. Every appearance seemed designed to correct perception rather than create it. And fashion doesn't reward effort you can see. It rewards effort that disappears. Vogue, above all, protects its credibility. It doesn't rebuild images. It doesn't referee reputations. It documents influence where it believes influence still exists. Cleanly, confidently, without negotiation. When faced with a request that blurred that line, the answer was simple. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. And that absence didn't come from hostility. It came from boundary. Vogue didn't need Meghan Markle to make the list work. The list worked without her. That's the reality institutions respond to. Not pressure, not visibility, stability. Once you understand that, the pattern becomes clear. The issue wasn't rejection, it was recalibration. Vogue chose to protect its authority rather than accommodate demands that challenged it. And in doing so, it sent a message that didn't need to be spelled out. Because in fashion and power, control isn't claimed. It's granted. And the moment you try to take it, access starts to disappear without ever saying goodbye. But when visibility keeps rising while influence keeps thinning, what happens next? Don't blink, because what comes next will shock you. Mystique lost. Exposure gained. For Meghan Markle, visibility didn't fade after stepping away from the royal family. It accelerated. Interviews followed interviews. Statements followed statements. Carefully framed appearances, polished messaging, and repeated explanations became the norm. From the outside, it looked like momentum. Inside elite fashion and media circles, it read very differently. The more present she became, the thinner her influence felt. Fashion doesn't reward frequency. It rewards restraint. That's where the shift happened. Every major appearance Meghan made arrived with context already attached, motive explained, narrative clarified, intent spelled out. Nothing was left for interpretation. And in fashion, that's fatal. Editors, designers, and tastemakers don't want to be told what to feel. They want space to decide it themselves. When a public figure controls every angle, every word, every image, there's no mystery left to elevate. Contrast that with Catherine. She appears less, says less, explains almost nothing, and because of that, every appearance lands heavier. The silence around her creates weight. The absence between moments builds anticipation. Meghan's presence, by comparison, became continuous. Familiar, predictable. That predictability matters. Once editors know exactly what a story will say before it's written, interest drops. Once a public figure's tone, message, and framing stop evolving, curiosity evaporates. Over time, Meghan's appearances stopped feeling organic and started feeling managed. Not spontaneous moments, but scheduled statements. Not cultural events, but controlled releases. This is where British Vogue quietly steps back. Vogue thrives on distance. It doesn't chase proximity. It doesn't need constant access to validate influence. In fact, Vogue has always favored figures it can approach selectively, not figures who appear everywhere at once. Scarcity creates authority. Saturation weakens it. That's why Vogue doesn't reward effort you can see. It rewards effort that disappears into confidence. When everything feels intentional, the illusion of effortlessness collapses. And once that illusion breaks, fashion loses interest fast. Meghan's story also became repetitive. Different platforms, same themes. Different interviews, same framing. Over time, the narrative stopped expanding. It circled, and in elite fashion spaces, repetition signals erosion, not growth. This isn't about popularity, it's about durability. Vogue isn't looking for figures who dominate headlines for a season. It looks for figures who can sit quietly inside culture without constant reinforcement. Catherine does that instinctively. Meghan increasingly does not. The result wasn't a public rejection, it was something more damaging, a gradual cooling, fewer invitations, less editorial curiosity, silence where enthusiasm once lived, not because Meghan vanished, but because she became too visible to remain compelling. That's the uncomfortable truth. Exposure didn't restore mystique, it replaced it. And once mystique is gone, even the most powerful platforms stop leaning in. They don't argue. They don't explain. They simply turn their attention elsewhere. And that's when image problems stop being about perception and start becoming structural. Life outside. The institution. Freedom was supposed to be the turning point. Walking away from royal duty was framed as independence, control and opportunity on Meghan Markle's own terms. And at first, it looked convincing. High-profile interviews, major media deals, global attention locked in. But as time passed, something became harder to ignore. Outside the institution, the weight of what had been left behind began to show. The post-royal phase came with big promises: streaming platforms, production agreements, exclusive partnerships. On paper, it looked like leverage had simply changed hands. In reality, returns started to thin. Projects launched with enormous anticipation struggled to maintain momentum. Viewership spiked early, then dropped. Media coverage became less celebratory and more cautious. Headlines seen once as breakthroughs slowly shifted toward questions. At the same time, relationships cooled. Invitations that once came automatically began to arrive conditionally, if they arrived at all. Support was no longer assumed. It had to be negotiated. In elite circles, that change matters. Influence that needs constant reinforcement is influence that's weakening. When institutions sense uncertainty, they pause, they watch, and often they step back. The uncomfortable truth is this: much of Meghan's early authority didn't exist in isolation. It flowed through proximity to the crown. The titles, the symbolism, the access, the centuries of institutional power behind them. Once that connection was severed, the safety net disappeared. Every move required more explanation. Every project carried more risk. Outside the monarchy, nothing absorbed impact on her behalf. Compare that to Catherine. She doesn't announce partnerships or explain positioning. The institution does the work quietly around her. Support isn't conditional. It's structural. She benefits from a system designed to protect continuity, not amplify conflict. Meghan, by contrast, entered an ecosystem where attention is loud, but loyalty is fragile. Media deals made this gap clearer. Attention came easily. Favor did not. Platforms were willing to feature Meghan, but far less willing to defend her long-term. When controversy surfaced, support softened. Silence replaced enthusiasm. That shift wasn't accidental. Corporations, like fashion houses and magazines, don't invest emotionally. They invest strategically. And strategy favors stability. This is where the idea of freedom became complicated. Freedom meant choice, but it also meant exposure. Without the institution, every decision landed directly on Meghan. There was no buffer, no tradition to absorb backlash, no hierarchy to lend weight when momentum slowed. Independence brought visibility, but it also brought isolation. And isolation is dangerous in industries that run on networks. Influence isn't just about talent or ambition. It's about alignment. Who stands with you when interest cools? Who benefits from your success? Who loses if you fall? Inside the monarchy, those answers are fixed. Outside it, they change fast. This isn't about regret. It's about leverage. Meghan exercised a personal choice, but the consequences were systemic. Institutions don't respond to intention. They respond to structure. Once she stepped away, she didn't just leave a role. She left a framework that quietly multiplied her power. That's the reality Vogue, media houses, and cultural gatekeepers read clearly. Freedom created space, but it also revealed how much weight the institution had been carrying all along. And once that weight was gone, the imbalance became impossible to hide. So when attention is everywhere but favor is nowhere, which one actually decides who stays inside the circle? Stay with us. Favor versus attention. Attention is loud, and Meghan Markle still generates it effortlessly. Her name trends. Headlines follow. Clips circulate within minutes. But attention has never been the final currency in elite fashion and media. Favor is. And favor decides who keeps access when the noise fades. That distinction explains everything Vogue just did. Institutions like British Vogue don't chase headlines. They protect authority. They align with figures who won't force explanations, crisis management, or constant recalibration. Vogue doesn't need volatility. It needs stability. And stability comes from favor, not attention. This is where Catherine fits cleanly. Catherine? Princess of Wales doesn't provoke institutions. She reinforces them. She doesn't require framing, clarification, or narrative defense. Vogue can define her influence in a single line and move on. Editors know exactly what she represents: continuity, restraint, and alignment with power structures built to last. Meghan's presence creates a different dynamic. Every major appearance invites interpretation. Every interview reopens debates. Platforms didn't plan to revisit. Outlets that feature her often inherit the aftershocks, pushback, demands for clarification, follow-up cycles that extend far beyond the original piece. Attention floods in, but favor hesitates. And when institutions hesitate, they quietly pull back rather than risk association fatigue. That's the calculation Vogue made. Vogue didn't need to defend Catherine or criticize Meghan. It didn't need to explain itself at all. It simply aligned with the figure who doesn't require explanation. That's how favor works. It moves quietly. It chooses what feels safe to stand beside years from now, not what dominates conversation this week. Meghan still commands visibility. That's undeniable. But visibility alone doesn't convert into institutional trust. Vogue isn't interested in managing narratives or negotiating terms. It prefers subjects whose presence strengthens its credibility without effort. Catherine does that by operating within systems that absorb pressure and move slowly. Meghan challenges systems publicly, and institutions rarely reward that with favor. This is why the contrast feels so sharp. One woman allows institutions to speak for her. The other speaks constantly for herself. One benefits from structures that buffer risk. The other carries consequences directly. Vogue didn't create that imbalance. It acknowledged it. And the acknowledgement wasn't loud. It was precise. By crowning Catherine and staying silent on Meghan, Vogue clarified where favor currently resides, not with whoever dominates attention, but with whoever reduces risk, not with whoever demands space, but with whoever fits seamlessly into the room. That's the point many miss. Vogue wasn't judging personality or ambition. It was making an institutional choice, and institutional choices aren't emotional. They're protective. Meghan didn't lose attention. She lost favor. Catherine didn't gain headlines. She retained trust. And in elite fashion and media, trust outlives trends. Every time. So, what do you think? Did Vogue choose Catherine for stability over Meghan's attention because institutions value security more than influence? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to share them in the comments below.